harnessing the upside of failure done well, so that when it really counts, you're going to be on your A game. I was privileged beyond measure to be a fighter pilot, which was my boyhood dream. When I was 4 years old is when I made the determination that I wanted to be like Luke Skywalker, watching Star Wars the first time. And when Top Gun came out in '86, that sealed the deal. And so off I go to become a fighter.
Yo, this is Christian D. Evans with Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to our amazing podcast. This is where we reveal the top 1% of business concepts and systems and processes to scale 8 and 9-figure businesses. We interview top-level 8 and 9-figure CEOs, business owners, and amazing TEDx speakers like David Meltzer. We got Nick Cavuto, Pascal Bachman, and so many others. And if you feel like this resonates with you, please share this with your friend, your family, and make sure you impact them as well, because we're trying to spread the message on those that do not know how to scale 8, 9-figure businesses and talking higher level business concepts. So guys, remember, enjoy the episode and be uncommon if you can. Cheers. Thank you so much for tuning in to Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, Christian D. Evans. Are you struggling to properly develop your leaders? Are you unsatisfied by the performance of your teams? And you believe your whole organization can perform better? Well, this next guest can answer those questions and so much more. He's the co-founder, the CEO of VMax Group Consulting, where they talk about and discuss accountable leadership, fellowship, high-performing teamwork, all centered around his methodology he calls the Debrief-Focused Approach. He's also a keynote speaker and author of the bestseller Debrief to Win, and a former fighter pilot. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my next guest, Robert Cujo Teschner. How you doing, Robert?
Hey, Christian, doing great. Coming to you today live from St. Louis, Missouri. Happy to be back at the home station for a couple of hours.
Well, hey, man, I'm really excited about diving into this because you have such immense experience in so many different avenues. And but before we dive into it, of course, everybody knows that you love to be called Cujo, and I think that's just an awesome name. However, though, I'd love to kind of walk through this a little bit, help our audience understand why and where did that come from, man?
Yeah, so there's a ritual in the Air Force. I think the Navy's got it, Marine Corps as well. Different levels of sort of specificity to it, but in the Air Force and specifically in the F-15 fighter squadrons, the naming ritual is a very, very important thing. It happens, you get named in your first operational assignment. Usually takes about 6 months until there's enough data on you to name you, and then there's a formal program that takes place in the squadron bar. Stories are told about you. The stories have to be, Christian, a minimum of 10% true in order to be told. So you can imagine what that might be like. And at the end of the night, names are associated with the stories. There's a vote taken by the tribe, and at the end of that vote, you're now formally whatever it is that you are. In my case, I was formerly Cujo, and that's how you're known by the community for the rest of your life. And it's something that doesn't change, not typically. I mean, there's rare exceptions to based on some amazing thing. Maybe you could get a potential renaming, but not likely. And it's interesting. I mean, we've got 4-star generals whose formal Air Force email addresses are callsign.lastname@us.af.mil, which says that it's kind of important.
It's ingrained. I love it. I think that's fantastic. Now, I want to kind of pivot very quickly and dive deep into this because, your book, Debrief to Win, why I think it's so positioned so perfectly right now is because as we're starting to see, we just came out of a pandemic, a lot of changes, a lot of stuff happening. You see a lot of people, suicide rate, all this stuff is really, really intense, right? Now, we're also starting to see here in the US some signs of recession potential. Now, I do know that it takes abundance mindset. I've talked to a lot of my colleagues and it's, hey, I'm not going to participate in the recession. Hey, I love that. However, though, for some individuals that, mindset is a huge thing. And I love the book, what you talk about, where it talks specifically about resilience. Strategically, if you could maybe just unpack that, because I know you had some incredible stories, particularly to the cancer and so forth. If you could unpack that and what that means to you and how you're able to kind of instill this to other individuals during these crazy times.
Yeah, no, I mean, great question, Christian, because I agree with you. And as a parent, I mean, we've got 5 kids over here at Team Teschner. These are crazy times. It's really easy to get kind of sort of down based upon overlapping disruptions, and it seems like the turbulence is just continuing on and on. Just about the time that that you say, okay, we're through this problem, whatever the problem is. Another one seems to be coming your way, and it's even worse. So an idea of mindset and resilience, I think, is important. In a fighter squadron, one of the things that I've noted from my time in a variety of squadrons, and starting off as a young lieutenant and then going through and commanding one, I would share with you that there's a central ethic that we've never really documented that I'm aware of. It's not painted on any walls. We never talked about it at any sort of commander's call that I've been to, but it does inform how we approach work. I think our central ethic is tomorrow is going to be better than today, always. If you take that tactically, our next mission is going to be better than this one, always. And that's, if we won, we're still going to do better next time. If we lost, we're going to bounce back and we're going to come back and win. And it sort of has to be that way, because you have good days and you have bad days. You've got days when you're on point. You've got days where you can't get anything right. You've got days where all the maintenance works. You've got days where half the airplanes break. You got days where everybody's feeling alive and vibrant. You got days when people are calling in sick. And you've got to have this ability to bounce back, I think, especially given the gravity of what it is we do in a fighter squadron. And then you cross-apply that into other domains, and you realize that right now I think we need to have that same approach as well. So much turbulence in the world. And so then the question is, how do you go about dealing with it? Do you allow the turbulence to crush you? Or do you say, we're going to learn from this turbulence, we're going to be very intentional about building a stronger team? And I think teams aren't really teams until they've been tested through the fire of turbulence. And we're going to take all of this and we're going to find a way to make this the pivot point into something better. I think that's an intentional decision that a team has to make. And in a fighter squadron, we make that intentional decision each and every day. And our mechanism to achieve tomorrow is going to be better than today intentionally is, we're going to dig into today to figure out, why did it happen, to the best of our ability to do so, to learn from it. If we won today, we're going to figure out, did we win because of us or because we got lucky? And if we find out that we got lucky today, we're going to celebrate that, because that deserves a celebration. A win is a win, as long as it's ethically achieved. Now, if we won, though, because of luck today, we've got to change something about how we're going to organize to win tomorrow, so that we're intentional about it being based upon us. And if we won today because of us, we ought to celebrate that. The human side of us needs that positive reinforcement. We need to hear, you need to hear, Christian, hey, brilliant job today. Like that, I realize you did what you're supposed to do, but you doing what you're supposed to do enabled us to win. So thank you for that. By the way, everybody else on the team, look at what the modeling behavior of what right looks like, and let's try to scale that forward. Let's maybe everybody be like a Christian tomorrow, so we can come back and keep on winning tomorrow. And if we lost today, we ought to dig into why, not with the intent of trying to punish, crucify, blame, make somebody feel bad, but rather to say, hey, let's figure this thing out. Let's figure out, what were the decisions that you made and why? What are the actions you took based upon those decisions? And maybe it turns out you made the right decisions, took the appropriate action. We lost today, but I wouldn't change a thing. And by the way, great job doing all of the above. And I can't wait to come back and try again with you tomorrow. That kind of an approach is the one that we harness in the high-performance team world. And I think it's desperately needed in the world in which we live today. I'll share this because you mentioned it, Christian, without going too long, and I apologize for maybe taking this thread further than you thought. I was diagnosed back in 2014 with colorectal cancer, and it was a crushing diagnosis, because it was accompanied by the doctor saying, I think this tumor's been growing for a decade. So we didn't know, based upon those initial words, whether this was like days, weeks, or months left to live. And my wife was 6 months pregnant with our fourth child at the time, so that was a double whammy, and we were overseas. We're far away from family. It just wasn't that great of a it wasn't a great time, especially in those early hours. So we get the diagnosis. I'm starving because of the colonoscopy prep that led to the discovery. My wife is starving because as a pregnant woman, she's just constantly hungry. So the first thing we do after our diagnosis was go have lunch. so here it is. We're sitting across from each other in downtown Stuttgart, Germany, having lunch, and we said over the lunch that we shared, our story just got better. It has to. I mean, when things fall apart, your mindset really matters. And so we could have either been crushed by that diagnosis and said, "Oh my gosh, it's all over. I'm dead. You're by yourself. Good luck." Or take the opposite approach. We said, our story just got better, and we're going to work to make tomorrow better than today. And it was the first time that we've ever cross-applied high-performance team principles into our family team domain But that's the journey that we've been on ever since that diagnosis in February of 2014. And if my wife were here right now, she'd tell you that we're a much stronger family team because of the cross application of these principles into our family, and it's been working out really, really nice for us. And oh, by the way, here we are talking in 2022, right? So it came true. I can't take credit for that. All I can tell you is the mindset helped us to have probably the best experience that you could imagine in such absolute disruption and chaos. GI surgeries, years trapped in a bathroom, all kinds of other messy things that you just don't want to acknowledge sometimes. Our family got tighter because of that, and because we used the principles that I wrote about in Debrief to Win for the very first time ever at home.
Well, you've said so much incredible things there, Cujo, and I just want to unpack a few things because it's like, obviously, I love the intentionality, what you were talking about. It is a choice. It is an intentionality. You have to be aware of that. And then as well as your story, I just appreciate you kind of just sharing that with our audience and being vulnerable, because I know that is very scary. But like you said, instead of sitting there and saying, you know what, I give up, whatever, let's figure something out, and I'm going to be gone in 2-3 years or whatever, and let's get our order, everything in order, right? Concept. You like, no, we're gonna go for this. And like you said, it's that switch the mindset. And I know a lot of that had to do with your military background and being a fighter pilot. However, though, I would just like to ask, did you consume other content? Because a lot of times it's that self-improvement business world, but you were in the military world. And so I'm just curious, did you consume that content? Who were your mentors that helped lead this mindset to really dialed in like this?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that there was any additional content that I absorbed in that time frame. I just reflected back. We get this horrible news, and I'm thinking to myself, what do you do with this? It was a very surreal sort of out of body, like I'm looking at myself intellectually going, what are you going to do with this thing, man? I'm curious to see how you respond. And it felt very natural for me to go back and think, well, if this was a fighter mission, we just lost our flight lead, or, the tanker fell out, or we're halfway across the Pacific and I've got an engine that's on fire, or whatever. What would you do? Would you panic? No. Absolutely not. Would you say, oh, we're all going to eject and die? Like, would you just accept defeat? No, absolutely not. We would always find a way. In a fighter squadron, we always find a way. Like, when things start to fall apart, it makes it more interesting, because it's too easy to win when everything goes according to plan. Typically, things don't go according to plan, though, and that's where it requires us to step up our game. And the opportunity to step up our game is the part that makes it really fascinating and is very fulfilling. I miss those days. Like, I miss going out there, watching the weather fall apart, folks showing up late to the push, not getting the right intel being a little bit off. Whatever the case might be, it causes you have to think while you're scooting across the skies at, Mach 1 plus. That's what makes it rewarding. And so it sort of hit us simultaneously, my wife and I, that like we wouldn't accept defeat in a fighter squadron. We're not going to accept defeat in our family squadron. Hey, there's a lot of things that I think really, really work in that other domain that apply here. And so to answer your question of who was it that taught me this, everybody that I ever learned from, whether it was the instructors who poured into me and helped make me into who I became, whether it was my teammates who were teaching me every single time that we went out there, it doesn't really matter. Together we all learn this, and I think together we all benefit from that, not just professionally but also personally, if we're open to it. And I really think that right now we ought to be open to the huge upside of coming through all of this chaos and disruption. I mean, I think we ought to, as business leaders, be able to look back next year and say, man, as crushing as so many of these things were to us, look what it's done to our teams and how much stronger we are as a result. A lot of times when I go speak to business leaders, they tell me that I benefited from being in a foxhole mentality with my teammates downrange, and they'll say we don't have that. Well, guess what? Ever since COVID-19, every one of us and every one of our businesses has been in that foxhole mentality. And it's done one of two things for us. It's either pushed us apart or it's brought us together. And I think the best teams are the ones that learn to fail well together. I think the best teams are the ones that build trust by learning how to overcome adversity together. So why not embrace that? And I would never wish, adversity on anybody. I wouldn't want somebody to have to walk a cancer journey, for example, to become a tighter family. Please, but maybe you could learn from my example, and say, okay, it seems like it worked for that guy. It seems pretty intent on it. Maybe we can maybe we could take a page from his book without having to go through the agony to get there.
When you were going through, and I appreciate you giving me some examples of like the fighter pilot experience, right? You had no other option. You really did. It was like, hey, I have to be resourceful. I have to be resilient. I have to find a way because I've got other individuals that I'm responsible for, these people's lives. And then coming over here to not being selfish and just saying, hey, I give up with their cancer story, but like, hey, you know what? I'm going to figure out a way and be resourceful. And I'm not going to panic because that doesn't help. And anxious, anxiety, stress, whatever it is. And then as well as, like you said, just die. I'm not going to accept that. I'm going to figure it out. Now, I am curious though, because, I think we can all agree that when you go through this experience, there are certain times when there is just maybe your energy's not full there. Maybe you kind of, those thoughts start, trickling in for whatever reason. What did you do during that time to get yourself snapped out? Because let's just acknowledge that at some point, there is going to be a time where, you know what? Those thoughts start trickling in. And at what point do you start putting the boundaries in, as well as the energy or like ways to snap yourself out of it to get you to say, I'm getting back on the track of resilience?
Yeah, look, I think, and if my bride were here, she would reaffirm this. We relied on humor. We laughed probably more through the darkest hours than we ever had prior to. And I mean, it was again an intentional choice. Like, are we going to let this next round of horrible news just absolutely roll us? No. So then, what other option do we have? Potentially to laugh about it. And so we did, and we laughed constantly. I mean, having a GI form of cancer, specifically in the part of there were so many things that we found ourselves laughing about that I would never want to speak about again, that I have PTSD about, hope never ever happens again. But at the time, what are you going to do? It's embarrassing. So we just laughed. Man, we laughed. My wife and I laughed in the most trying of circumstances. She would go from crying because of sadness to crying because of the thing, the way that we made fun of the deal, and that was a very effective approach for us. And it wasn't like a fraudulent laughter, like the kind where you just come in and like sort of force it. I mean, we really found the humor in it, and there's something to it. I really believe that there's something to it, and it helped us tremendously. And she would also tell you that we've been married now 17 and a half years. In January, we celebrated 17. She said, I love you more today than I ever have before. And I think it was because of that journey through cancer that got us to this point. Now, you think about that from a business standpoint, and it's so easy to kind of everybody lose their minds. There's no hope, rising costs, supply chain issues. We're losing people because of the Great Resignation. We've got a fractured society. Everybody on the team hates each other because of this, that, or the. I mean, it's very easy for us to just look at that with like, or we can sit there and find the upside of it. We can be very intentional about saying, okay, team, we can let this crush us or not. We can find everything to be discouraging or not. I mean, wouldn't it be great to be the one exception to the rule, the place that nobody left from because this was such a special place to be all the way through? Could have made a couple of extra bucks working someplace else, but you wouldn't have the kind of culture that we have over here. That would be something. I miss the fighter pilot culture. It was one that was full of, it was a difficult job. Pulling 9 times the force of gravity, it takes its toll on your body. It's physically demanding. It hurts. Being deployed, being away for months from your family, that hurts. Potentially taken around, for Team USA, that seriously hurt. And yet I miss the people that I did all of that with because we found a way to make it fun. And if I could typify every one of my deployments, it was a fun experience with a group of people that came from different backgrounds, thought differently about things. It wasn't one like uniform, like everybody was the exact same. No, in fact, part of the fact that we were different made it that much fun. But we found a way to have fun while we were trapped in wherever it was, Sandbox X, in the middle of Nowheresville, a place you'd never probably pay to go. We found a way to make that experience fun, and I miss those days.
I love that. I love that. Now I'm curious, how did humility play a role in this? Because as things come about and failures and experiences and that frustration, that annoyance, like you said, it is somewhat embarrassing, but I'd love to just see how humility played a role in kind of, whether it be the military background, what you're doing now, or that the cancer story.
Yeah, great question. And I think the behaviors that are that are necessary in order for us to build teams that really work include being vulnerable. You've got to lead with vulnerability. We need leaders who can be vulnerable. And if you're looking for a formal definition, I mean, Dr. Amy Edmondson, Novartis Professor of Leadership and Management at Harvard Business School, she defines vulnerability essentially as admitting to mistakes and weaknesses publicly. That's in front of your superiors, your peers, your subordinates, which is a really tough thing to do. And if vulnerability is that, I mean, who here wants to do that? I'm saying you got to be able to do that if you're going to be your very best. And you brought up embracing failure. If we're gonna learn from our failures, if we're gonna bounce back from our failures, the first thing is we have to acknowledge who led us to that failure. And if leaders can't be vulnerable and take ownership, then that's a big deal. So vulnerability is important. Turns out in a fighter squadron, and I didn't know this, like if you had accused us of this 10 years ago when I was on active duty leading a fighter squadron, I would have said, get out of here, Christian. How dare you? Nobody in my squadron is vulnerable. We have behind closed doors in our debriefs one of the highest degrees of rewarded vulnerability of any organization on the planet. If you're going to stay in the fighter pilot community, you better learn how to be vulnerable very, very quickly. Otherwise, you're going to be cut. Then there's humility. What is humility? I define it as freedom from pride or ego. If you're going to embrace failure, you've got to be humble. And in fact, you see me wearing this polo shirt. I wear this polo. It's the VMax group polo wear for things like this. In order to wear this patch, this is a graduate patch for the Fighter Weapons School at Nellis Air Force Base. You have to live the ethos, humble, approachable, credible. Every one of our graduates at the Air Force Top Gun School, the Weapons Instructor course, you have to be humble, approachable, credible to graduate. And humility is necessary because you've got to learn from your failures. And I would promise you this, we've never flown a perfect mission. We've never executed a perfect mission ever. And I don't care what the discipline is. I don't care what subset of the Air Force it is. We're always in pursuit of perfection, but we've never achieved it. And so if that's the case, then we've got to be able to learn from those mistakes to try to make tomorrow better than today. So I think humility and vulnerability are two pieces of a very important puzzle that help us to be good teammates. Another one, and I emphasize this when I teach organizations how to debrief well, how to practice accountability well, we've got to be self-aware, and the self-aware piece is a component of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is mission critical in the midst of chaos. Because if you can't self-regulate, if you can't maintain your calm, your composure, your cool, then who wants to follow you? And then what does that do to the rest of the team dynamic? It probably spurs everybody else to kind of lose their cool as well. And if our EQ is going down as chaos is going up, it's not serving us well at all. And finally, and this I'd say in the bigger picture, Christian, is maybe arguably even more important, empathy. We have to have empathy. We have to understand where people are coming from, understand the context in which they're making the decisions that they're doing. And I think the fracture in our society demands us to struggle or to strive towards empathy even more so than ever before. It's so easy to not empathize today. It's so easy to point fingers and to say, well, you are wrong. And with that, I have nothing for you. There's a reason why people think the way that they do. Some empathy would probably be useful to all of us, especially in a team setting. And those four components allow us to build stronger teams that learn how to thrive in disruption, which is a very, very important attribute with as much chaos and disruption as is in the business world today, but really writ large as is in the world, no matter where we are in it, business or not today.
Well, I love that, and I really appreciate you unpacking that and diving into this, because vulnerable, humility, self-aware, and empathy. Now, I like to dive a little bit further into each one, because we hear that. However, though, could you help us understand what that looks like in like you say, kind of behaviors, right? Vulnerable, because one of the reasons why I'm saying this is because I've noticed where you have to have discernment of what to share and what not to share, right? Because a lot of people have those demons. It's like, well, you have to have that discernment to say, hey, is this wise for me to share it? Is it going to elevate the whole structure of everything? And some things like, hey, I was thinking about, having sex with your wife. Maybe I shouldn't say that's vulnerable, but maybe you shouldn't say that, right? And so you have to have that discernment. I just gave a crazy example, obviously, but just to reiterate. But I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And I think judgment is always necessary, right? Judgment precedes everything. Leadership is situational. The way that you lead, it varies depending on the circumstances, depending on the needs of the team at the time. But I would say if there's one element that's always necessary, it's for a leader to be able to admit to mistakes. Now, what mistakes does a leader admit to in what circumstance? Um, that's where the judgment piece comes into play. I mean, the example that you gave, I wouldn't share that one with the rest of the team, but I would be willing to say, look, hey team, as you know, we're kind of in tight financial times. Part of the tight financial times is I made the decision, as you know, a couple of weeks ago to invest in this capability or to try, this new approach to marketing or whatever the case might be, and it didn't work, and that's on me. I heard you, Christian, when you said, I don't think this is a wise move. I made the decision anyway. That's my prerogative as the leader. But guess what? You were right. And I own the fact that you were right and I was wrong. So now how are we going to learn from this and bounce back? It's not to say that, now you're exclusively right and I'm exclusively wrong and whatever you say is going to go. But I just want you to know that I hear you. I acknowledge the fact that you warned against this and you were right. You're right, brother, and I appreciate that. Now, in that simple illustration, what we've done here is a couple of things. We said, I've heard you. I heard you when you said it. I'm hearing you again now in the moment of this frustration. I'm owning the fact that you gave me wise counsel. And so you knowing that your opinion counts, that matters. The fact that I've shared with you that I acknowledge that you were right and I was wrong probably builds trust in me from you. And it creates a tighter bond of team cohesion as we move forward. And the next time that we come into a friction point, or you say this or whatever else, we're probably going to come back and say, look, man, just like last time, I'm hearing you. I 100% do. If I'm wrong again this time, this is again on me. But I want you to know I value the fact that you don't just tell me what it is that you think I want to hear. You're telling it the way that you see it, and that's awesome. And that's why you're on this team. Because I need diversity of thought in order for us to be our very best. Again, the leader owns the decision-making prerogative, but that's the kind of vulnerability that I really emphasize. Now, I share my cancer story. That's an evidence of vulnerability as well, and it's a double evidence of it because now we're talking about personal stuff. We're talking about personal stuff that hurts. We're talking about personal stuff that most people, unfortunately, in this world are connected to some way or another. You've got friends, you've got loved ones, you've got family members that have gone through that journey, and some of the times it's really horrible stories that we have. So sharing that is a connection point. It's a link, but it's also an entry into the fact that I got cancer because of me, I think. And so if you want to really dig into this, I'll be further vulnerable with you and tell you that the initial symptoms that I had were back in 2004 when I was a young instructor at your fighter weapons school. I ignored them. I never shared them with anybody. And when they popped back out again in 2013, that's the second time that I've had these symptoms. It's the first time that I've told anybody on the planet about this. And by that point, it was too late to do anything about it. So you want me to get really vulnerable? I take full ownership for the fact that I owed it to everybody that I know and love back in 2004 to at least introduce the idea that there might be something wrong with my system, so that I can get some inputs. Maybe the flight doc could say, hey, let's go take a look at this, or I could talk to my father and he can say, hey, we've got a history of this in our family, it's worth exploring. Or I could talk to whomever just to get some counsel. I don't do that. Since I don't do that, I own the fact that I screwed this thing up. Why would I share that moment of vulnerability? My guess is, Christian, you've got somebody that's going to watch this or listen to it who's in a similar circumstance. Maybe it's not colorectal concerns, but maybe it's something else where they've had some signals that maybe the system wasn't fully right. Their inclination is to not act on it. They're young, they're bulletproof, like I was back in those days. Maybe this small act of vulnerability helps them to make a better, a wiser decision moving forward, so they don't fall into the same trap that I did, and they don't fall victim to the same circumstances that I put myself in. And in that case, my judgment is this is worth its weight in gold for somebody.
I love that perspective. I think that was my first time ever hearing it, because I've always heard vulnerability because you're able to impact that individual. But what I love what you just said is that if you actually hold yourself back from vulnerability, it actually hurts you. Just like you said in 2004, I think is what you said, you did not You were not vulnerable. You saw the symptoms. You saw this was happening, but you're like, no, I'm just going to push this off and I don't want anybody to know. And then guess what? It just got worse. And I love that because how many times were we not able to just, maybe in our business or maybe our team or maybe our structure, maybe even our family, and not identify it and say, what's going on? And that kind of loops me around into, I really love the concept of self-awareness because, your third pillar, if you will, of what you explained, because during failure, right, and if you acknowledge that at some point I will failure, that's a guarantee, then it's a matter of, okay, how should I properly look at failure? And secondly, how do I optimize that failure experience, right? Really, what questions should I be asking? How should I look at it properly? Like, hey, what am I learning? What systems can I implement? What did I do wrong? Really, really taking a deep, deep dive into that. And I think so many times we sit in it like, oh, I don't want to do that again. And then we just keep moving. Or maybe we say, okay, that's cool. I fixed a few things, but we don't really go to the next level. And I'd love to get your response. How do you properly look at it, but also how do you really optimize that failure experience and say, you know what, I'm gonna just tear that onion apart until I get to that core.
Yeah. Yeah, here's how you do it. You acknowledge it's the best way to be your best. Like the only way that you're ever going to get to where you want to be is by failing as often and as early as possible. Harnessing the upside of failure done well, so that when it really counts, you're going to be on your A game. I was privileged beyond measure to be a fighter pilot, which was my boyhood dream. When I was 4 years old is when I made the determination that I wanted to be like Luke Skywalker, watching Star Wars the first time. And when Top Gun came out in '86, that sealed the deal. And so off I go to become a fighter pilot. But I was a scrawny little guy. Like everybody laughed at me when I said I was going to be a fighter pilot. They're like, dude, even if you could climb into one of these things, it would break you to do so. And 3Gs is going to crush you. You're going to die. So nobody believed that this would happen. The only reason that I got to where I did, the only reason that I was able to stay in it as long as I did was because early on in the whole evolution, my instructor pilots, through failure, taught me how to get better really quickly. And it was through the failures that they inspired resilience in me. I would come back from a mission having made egregious mistakes that cost the entire team. Did we achieve mission success? No, and it was because of Cujo. They would come in and instead of saying, "You suck, man, do you suck? You're the worst F-15 pilot we've ever seen," we're clearly scraping the bottom of the barrel if you're flying one of these. No, they'd be like, "Do you realize that you made improvements in 2 areas over yesterday?" Yeah, I get the fact that the big mission outcome wasn't exactly right, but in these 2 areas, and they're critical areas, young Cujo, you did markedly better than you did yesterday. That's awesome, and you're on exactly the right trajectory. Now, let's keep this thing up. Let's keep this, and let's learn from today. Let's keep doing those 2 things that you figured out from yesterday. Let's do those things right tomorrow. Let's work now on these things over here. And so it was through those failures day in and day out that I got to a point where I was incredibly confident. Every time that I went downrange into harm's way, it's like, we got this. It was much worse in our training. We went against much more difficult scenarios. We overcame them. There's nothing that the bad guys can throw at us that we haven't already seen. We've got this. And what I found was the mindset from the really good instructors, the people that I wish that I could have emulated better when I was teaching others, was they would smile as they unpacked our failures, and they found a way to reframe failure for its upside. I write about it in my book. I had an instructor named Lieutenant Colonel Ken Tatum, call sign Mock. Flew a horrible mission as a young 4-ship flight lead. So I'm leading 3 other people. We're going into simulated bad gun. It was a miserable disaster of a mission. I spent 3.5 hours digging into, in our debrief, all the mistakes that I made and all the mistakes we all made. And at the end of my 3.5 hours of misery, everybody was hanging their head. Like, just, oh my gosh, do we suck? I mean, essentially it was like, we are horrible. Okay. Then he stands up, he takes over from me. He's giving me my feedback on the day, my debrief. And he was nothing but positive. He starts off by thanking me for all the hard work that I put into the day. He's like, it's clear you gave your all in mission planning. You gave us an inspirational pre-mission briefing. It was outstanding. You led as well as you could. I mean, what is this, the second time you've ever done a Cujo? And you just poured everything that you know into us for the last 3.5 hours. And I honor that and I thank you. And they said, dude, do you realize that we were 2 decisions from victory today? And I bet you if you make these 2 decisions differently, next time is going to be a spectacular victory for you. He spent 10 minutes explaining those two decisions to me. And in those 10 minutes, re-inspired me to want to come back and give it a shot again. He rebuilt my faith and confidence in my own ability to lead at a time when I didn't have any faith and confidence in myself. And sure enough, 2 days later, I go back and refly the mission, and it's mission success. Now, that's an art form. There's a special touch. Really inspirational leaders know how to dig into failure, realize that not every mistake is equally important. Find the 1, 2, 3 that are most critical. Turn it around to say, don't you realize if we had done this and this differently, today would have been a massive victory. You want to come back tomorrow and go try again? Who wouldn't want to follow that person? And so now you've got hope. Now you're bouncing back from a defeat. Now you've got your confidence back and you're ready. And you're almost disappointed that you have to wait until tomorrow to get another swing at the bat. That's a great place to be. That's the kind of environment that I hope every organization is becoming now and is creating for their teammates, because we so desperately need hope and optimism at a time when there's so much negativity.
Wow. And there's just so much there to unpack, and it's just so neat to see, like, obviously having the right leader that comes in and says, yes, we failed, we did whatever, but you know what, and like you said, just being able to add value as much as possible and being inspirational. And one of the things I really want to dive into a little bit is where you're able to have a mentor that's been there, done that, and knows exactly how to succeed. And he's able to analyze what you did wrong. And what I find so interesting, definitely in this hashtag hustle culture, where we're moving, we're going, we're building, we're going, there's just a lot of activity. We're hitting our head against the wall. And we don't sit there tactically and strategically say, oh, there's a door. Oh, there's a window. Oh, maybe there's another way around. And like you said, looking back and saying, hey, you know what? What are the two things, like you mentioned in your story, that we need to focus on and adjust? And sometimes we look at this huge picture. We need to fix this whole thing, this whole production. And what I like, maybe give me an example of maybe a client of yours that you've worked with that, hey, they were just overwhelmed by this huge production, the team, they weren't performing, maybe it might be whatever. And you said, oh, it's actually these small little incremental changes that we need to adjust, change, and optimize. And all of a sudden the performance just produced. So I'd love to get your, maybe just a few stories that you have in the back.
Yeah. So, in the fighter squadron, we use our accountability mechanism as a coaching tool. So the way that we tactically day in and day out approach life to dig into why did today happen so we can make tomorrow better than today, that's what we call a debrief. And it's the tactical practice of accountability. And I define accountability as taking absolute ownership for the outcomes that the team achieves. So it's in our debriefs that we learn to take absolute ownership for the outcome that the team achieves. And who ultimately owns it? It's the leader. So now we've got a structure where the leader is going to own the outcome that the team achieves. And if one of us fails, we all do. That's one of the high performance team components. And so that's a necessary component of how it is we build trust. In our debriefs, we don't crucify each other. Not when it's done the right way. We don't come in here and say, "How dare you, Christian? You screwed up so badly. You're a miserable pilot. I never want to fly with you again." No, we go, "Hey, dude, what were you thinking here? Ah, okay. Based upon what were you thinking? What did you want to do there? How did you go about doing it? Okay, so it sounds like your thought process was spot on, Christian. It just seems like the technical way that you got there, that piece is a little bit lacking. Not surprising, given you haven't flown this mission in 6 months. Let's talk about how to get those technical skills up to par to match the decision quality, and tomorrow is going to be an outstanding thing." So we coach you up in the midst of our debriefs to make you better, and I think everybody benefits from having a coach. Now, on the business side of this, my partner, he's a guy I presented to. I was giving a talk on how to debrief to win. He was in the audience. Business leader, created a multi-million-dollar company on his own. He sits there and then afterwards shares with me the fact that he used to be a fighter pilot. Okay, so he didn't tell me this going in. He's just sitting there watching this whole spiel. And afterwards, like, yeah, I lived all that too. And by the way, what you're talking about, it needs to be cross-applied into business. And eventually he said, "Hey, can I come join you? Can I come join you on your mission to go bring this thing into business?" He has long been a proponent of having a coach. No matter who you are, where you are in the organization, you need a coach, somebody that's going to help you to be your best as you're navigating all these things. And really what he's served for me in our company is my coach, taking a pause, looking at things from the outside, bringing a sometimes contrarian view, but always helping us to apply our own principles to us, so that we can better serve in what it is that we do. And then we take that approach forward into the businesses that we go into, because it's so easy to get caught into day to day. I mean, there's fire hose, there's so much stuff coming at us, and we need somebody to help us to be able to cut through all of that chaff and to focus in on the one or two things that every day are most important to us, so that we're making meaningful progress moving forward. And there are a few people that I've seen do it better than my partner. And with our longest lasting customer, over 2 years now together with them to date, a company that's in pursuit of their first billion in revenue, and is doing very, very well in the domain that they're in, he serves that purpose. And he's the person that every member of the team goes to for the, hey, keep me sane, with all the stuff that's going on over here. What's most important for us? And it's really neat to watch that unfold because of the trust that he's engendered with them by virtue of serving that same role that every fighter pilot serves within the squadron day in and day out. So that's a long-winded, but it gets into 3 different components of your question: where it originates from in a fighter squadron, how we've applied it here into VMax Group, and then highlighting that my partner does exactly that for our longest tenured client to date, and it's a relationship that's very, very powerful.
Just beautiful and beautiful. And if we could just loop back around with the debrief a little bit as well. When you've got to find someone that is a coach that's been there, done that, and that they can focus on those and identify what those 1 or 2 things are. And then as well as the individual that is taking it on, obviously humility comes into play, where you want to learn and you have to be teachable. But I'd like to walk through that a little bit as well, that relationship, because I do think, and I've been in the situation where, hey, I don't take advice from people that haven't been there, but also I've been known for not taking advice from people that have been there, and I still ignore it just because I want to do my own thing. And obviously it has cost me and whatever. So it's just really being able to have that relationship and how to really just make sure that there's a very synergistic relationship as well.
Yeah, okay. So here we'll take it back into the cancer realm for a second, Christian. If I were perfect, I would have never gotten cancer. Clearly, I'm not perfect, so here we are. And it took me getting cancer to really recognize just how deep my imperfections were, in order to be open to all of the pieces that we talked about. Vulnerability. Outside of the fighter squadron debrief, I was a not very vulnerable person. In my private life, incredibly non-vulnerable. Like, I would never admit to any mistakes or weaknesses in any setting outside of the fighter squadron vault, because it just wasn't me. Now I talk openly about colorectal cancer, and I'm doing so with strangers in media that I would never. I mean, this is going to be recorded on the internet for the rest of eternity. That's a tough spot to be in, but I recognize that it's a necessary place to be, and I'm open to it. Now, a little bit more on my background. I chose to pick the F-15C model. I graduated high enough in my pilot training class to pick the airplane that I was going to fly, and I specifically wanted to fly an airplane with nobody else in it, because in pilot training, 13 months long, I was sick and tired of having somebody in my back seat evaluating the quality of my landings or suggesting that I might do it this way or that way or some other tweak to how it was that I was doing. Like, you know what? When I'm done with this whole experiment and learning how to fly, I'm going to do it my own way. And if I crash as a result, fine, that's on me. And so I went forth into the single-seat world of F-15Cs, and I loved it. Now, we fast forward 2014. I'm going in for my first of 2 horrific GI surgeries. I'm downtown on the economy at the Katharinenhospital, St. Catherine's, in downtown Stuttgart, Germany, and I demand my own room. I'm like, this is the biggest event of my life, second only to my birth. I'm going to have my own room, all right? So imagine my horror and dismay when I show up the night prior to my surgery and I've got a roommate, 85-year-old man, who tells me in German, "I'm so sorry, but I snore horribly." And he does. I mean, I did not sleep the night before my massive first surgery because this guy's snoring up a storm. It was just horrible. I was so angry. I mean, truly, there was no, like, I was already nervous as get out and worried about what happens if they screw this thing up, and am I going to survive this surgery? And then I've got this room, and I was just miffed. So anyway, we fast forward. It's the end of day 1. My wife is gone. She's back home. We're alone. Neither of us can do anything for ourselves. Like, we're 100% dependent on others. You know, I've been filleted. I'm lying there. You know, everybody's doing things. I've got tubes. I've got things. It's just gross. The whole thing was gross. He was in a similar situation. We're just lying there. And it's boring. There's no TV. There's nothing going on. So he leans over and, he just looks at me. He's like, "Hey, man, what do you do for a living?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm a pilot." And he asks me in German, "What do you fly?" I'm like, "F-22s." He's like, "Oh, that's pretty cool." And then he says, "When I was younger, I was in the Hitler Youth. And my job was to man the anti-aircraft artillery battery in my village. And it was my job to shoot down the bombers of the 8th Air Force." And I look at this guy, Hitler Youth, anti-aircraft dude, shooting at grandpa. And in an instant, I felt more alone than I ever have in my life, trapped on the 8th floor of St. Catherine's Hospital, downtown Stuttgart, Germany, literally sleeping with the enemy, okay? And so we finish up whatever conversation we're having. I think I may have looked the other way and just gone, "Oh, Calgon, take me away." Now we fast forward. It's the middle of the night. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm in the worst pain of my life. It's such a horrific pain. I can't describe it to you. There aren't words that do it justice. It was just absolutely horrible. We knew the Germans weren't into pain medication, so it was something that I knew could be the case. But I thought I was a tough guy, and so I'd handle it. But man, I couldn't handle it. And so I called the nurse into the room, and I'm thinking in my mind, two options: more morphine or death. Let's go with the morphine. So I asked her for some help there, and she said, "No, you're fine. You're not getting anything." I'm like, "Miss, and I'm shaking, like every part of my body is shaking. And I said, "No, miss, you have to understand, like, I cannot continue. I really wish I were dead. Like, if you can't get me some medicine, I'll we'll pursue that option. Let's not pursue that option. Just give me some medicine." She said, "I'm not getting you anything." And all of a sudden, my roommate chimes in. And he says, "Miss, I've been watching this young hero suffer silently for hours now. And if he's asking for your help, I would encourage you to give him some." And she said, "No, I've been doing this job for 27 years. I know what he needs and what he does, and he's not getting anything." And he came back and said, "No, you don't understand. I'm a former senior executive at Siemens. I know every decision maker in this hospital. I assure you that if he doesn't get some relief within the next 5 minutes, you're going to be gone tomorrow forever." And within 5 minutes, I got my next dose of morphine. Now, left to my own devices, I'd be flying solo at a time when I desperately needed a teammate, somebody to help me out, to cover me for the things that I could not take care of on my own. I would not have made it through that night were it not for my 85-year-old snoring roommate, who I am eternally grateful for. And I have been, sometimes, like you, hesitant to take other people's counsel and advice and apply it to me. But that's because of my own thick skull and the fact that I used to believe that I had all the answers. It took some really tough, dark times for me to realize, wait a second, I never have had all of them. I've only become who I am since the beginning because of others. And so why would I change? Why would I go against that then if it's been so effective for me? It's a long-winded way of saying I'm open to it. I'm open to the contrarian opinion. I love the fact that somebody's willing to challenge the status quo. Somebody's willing to step aside and say, "Well, I see the world a little bit differently." That can only help us, I think.
What a beautiful story, man. And I appreciate you sharing that. And I just think it's just so interesting how that was a beautiful analogy of, like you said, hey, I'm flying solo, and here this guy over here that was totally unexpected came in and assisted you and was able to produce that result. However, I also find it interesting that you had vulnerability in the career, and that it never flooded over into the personal side. And it wasn't until, like you just mentioned, that you were in pain and really massive, you actually experienced the cancer situation. And then that was when you're like, okay, I've got to be vulnerable. Now there is no other choice. And so for those that are listening right now that are like, you know what, I got it, I'm quote unquote vulnerable, but I still could always be more, right? Or I don't want to share more. And a lot of times we don't, that's where failure comes into play. It is almost a slap in the face. It is a demand vulnerability. It is demand humility. I'm always curious, is there ever a possibility of being proactive? Or does it truly cause, hey, I have to go through turmoil, detriment in order to really achieve humility at the deepest level and vulnerability?
Yeah, great question. And I don't know, but what I will tell you is when I went through pilot training, we had the benefit of a binder. And in this binder, every day after every mission, my fellow students, folks that were flying the missions that I was about to, would document what they learned in their experience. You know, say, hey, I failed today's mission because I didn't do X, Y, or Z, and they would just share that with the rest of the trainees. And then, you know, before you went and flew your same type of mission, you'd go through and take a look at what other people had learned in their experience, so that you would hopefully do better than them. Like, you'd start better than them, right? The Thunderbirds do this. The Thunderbirds, as I understand it, before any Thunderbird flies their first Thunderbird mission, they have to go back and read all the accident reports for all the different Thunderbird teams and all the different catastrophes that they had, which, you know, the one that stands out in my mind is when the 4-ship flew into the ground together at Indian Springs in Nevada. You know, the flight lead's got a problem, everybody else stays in formation on them, they all die. Why does a new Thunderbird pilot have to read that? It's so that we honor those who gave their all in that way and never repeat that mistake again. I hope that maybe somebody out there, maybe one person out there, hears our conversation and they go, you know what, that actually does apply to me. Maybe I'm a certain way at home, but I'm not that way at work, or vice versa. And maybe there's benefit to applying team principles that work in one domain into all domains. And maybe I don't have to go through colorectal cancer or some other forcing point to take this thing on. And if this dialogue inspires somebody to take meaningful action without having to go through that pain, then it's been worth our time to explore some of the stories that I've shared, some of that vulnerability, because now somebody doesn't have to experience that. And that, to me, would be the biggest win of this discussion.
What does that look like in the, because I feel like there's levels of humility and levels of vulnerability. And it's not like all of a sudden, oh, I'm vulnerable, I'm humility. You know, it is more of like something happens, and then all of a sudden I got to tell more, and then all of a sudden I got to tell more, and so forth and so on. And there's more of a discovery. And at least that's how I experienced it a little bit when I was, was prosecuted for 6 felonies, when I was addicted to pornography. It was just almost like, okay, thank you, God, I appreciate it. And it was a process, and it was levels that I experienced as I fell down the stairs tremendously. But I'd love to get your response. Like, what did that timeline look like, specifically in vulnerable and humility? Was it just instantaneous, like, you know what, I'm humbled, you know, whatever? Or was it like in depth, where when all of a sudden you got more bad news and more bad news, or you know, something else, or something wasn't working out, or maybe a diagnosis, and you're like, hey, you thought you were moving forward, and then all of a sudden, you know, something happened where it wasn't as effective, that medicine or whatever.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that, the kind of the levels that you had to go through.
For me, I don't think there were any levels, Christian. Frankly, I think I do remember when all the diagnosis piece came out, and I started to reflect on what I thought was the root cause to the whole thing, which is that I never shared any of my early symptoms with anybody. I remember apologizing to my wife and saying, I'm so sorry that I put you in this position. And that was just a natural instinct. And she's in tears, and she's like, you know, don't be apologizing. You know, how could you hold yourself to such a standard that I don't think anybody does? Like, hey, let's apply team principles at home, kind of a thing. Let's hold ourselves accountable for whether or not we're communicating well. I mean, that might be an elevated approach to a young couple that's in their early 30s, you know, that wouldn't just naturally fit most people. So she said, I don't accept your apology, not because I don't appreciate it, because I don't think it's warranted. I said, I do, and I put you in a really bad spot. And I feel like it was at that moment that I was willing to share everything. And the reason that I was willing to share everything, and maybe it's uncomfortable, I don't know if anybody's going to listen to this, and if they do, if they're going to like it, but I do so because why not? You know, I only see upside to it. I only see upside to me saying I was a complete idiot. Like, I'm not going to put, you know, shade of this. You know, I was only 50% idiot. You know, 50% of me was outstanding. No, I think I was kind of a 100% idiot. Now, I'm not going to hang my head in blame and shame for the rest of my life. I'm not going to sit and be like, and I'm going to be an idiot for the rest of my life. No, I was an idiot at that point. Here's what I've learned from it. I'm never going to be an idiot like that again. And if I do, it's on me. Like, and that's unacceptable. I've got 5 little kids that need me to lead the same way at home that I once led in a fighter squadron. They need us to be the same kind of a team that bounces back through adversities, learning constantly, has hope and optimism in a better tomorrow. Because what kind of a world would it be if that weren't the case? My family needs us to do that, and I'm committed to it. And now the additional feature to this is I'm throwing this out there through you and through your platform, so that maybe one person says, I'll give that a shot, to make that kind of an impact to help somebody else out. And I don't hold back. And I understand where you're coming from. Just for me, it just seemed like it was just a flood of, that's it. I'm completely transparent now.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I just think it's very viable, and I really just appreciate just unpacking vulnerability because we hear that so much, and I really appreciate the humility, self-aware, and empathy structure, and just the immense value that you brought. Just being open and telling your story, but also so applicable. Such just beautiful analogies throughout that story. Cujo, how can our audience reach out to you, be part of what you've got going on, get access to your book and your community, man?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking, Christian. We have a purpose at my company, VMax Group, and our purpose is to teach and inspire real teamwork so that business teams like those that your listeners lead thrive in the midst of disruption, and we do so specifically to keep our economy strong. Why does that matter? We live in a really dangerous time. We need a strong defense. We don't have a strong defense unless the economy is strong. And I don't care what member of the NATO alliance it is that you're listening to, what partner country it is that is tuning into this. Every one of us is in the exact same boat. And so we're on a mission to scale accountability, which is our way of teaching teamwork and leadership done well so that we can be our very best. And so if you're interested in that, VMaxGroupLLC.com, VMaxGroupLLC.com. That's how you can find us on the internet, and I'd love a discussion with you.
Awesome. And guys, those links will be in the description below, so make sure you click on that. And the biggest thing I always tell individuals is it's about taking action. It's about realizing it, it's understanding, acknowledging. It's like, okay, there's something missing, and you feel it and you experience it. It's an intuition. Reach out to Cujo, man, and he'll be able to, him and his team. So those links will be in the description. And Cujo, again, just appreciate the immense value that you brought today. I was literally just taking tons of notes, and I definitely know our audience has as well that's listening to this. Is there any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share before we let you go?
Yeah, thanks for what you do. Being a voice of positivity and good in the world is an important thing in days like these, and I honor what it is that you have built and are continuing to build. So I say keep on doing great work, Christian. I'm honored to be on your show.
Awesome. Well, that's very humbling. I really appreciate that. Definitely coming from you. And again, Cujo, man, I really appreciate it, guys. That is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Until next time, remember, be uncommon if you can. Yo, this is Christian D. Evans, Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. We thank you so much for listening to this amazing episode. If you feel and you know that this was valuable to you, please show some love to our amazing guest by liking this, by commenting on this, by making sure that you do a nice 5-star review and just show some love to our guest. That'd be really awesome. Also, make sure you share this with a friend, a family, a colleague, someone that you believe would bring value to their life right now. And guys, we just want to say thank you again for just being part of our community. If you want to have more resources, don't be afraid. Go to christiandevans.com. You can actually schedule a phone call with me, or you can send me an email at christian.evans@beUncommonIfYouCan.com. That's christian.evans@beUncommonIfYouCan.com. Always love to hear some feedback, and let me know what is the number 1 or 2 things that you are struggling in your business and your life, and we'll make sure we have those conversations. Guys, that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast, and until next time, remember, be uncommon if you can. Cheers.